So when the term California cuisine was coined over 30 years ago, it promised to usher in a brave new era, one in which the constricting shackles of conventional cooking would be thrown off in favor of a style as wide open and vast as the western horizon. Smoked salmon pizza, grilled fish with fruit salsa, beaten goat cheese salad. The food was light and brightly flavored, energetically mixing together disparate cultural traditions. Its effect rippled across the country, but nowhere was it felt more strongly than in Northern California, where it came to represent a simple, rustic way of cooking. I never intended for Quad to be a destination restaurant. From the beginning, I set out to cook food that Californians would enjoy. I brought the connection to nature, to the plants that they grew up with, into our kitchen. I used only local vegetables, fish, and meat, in many cases the same ones they could find in nearby markets. I incorporated familiar culinary tropes. My attempts at calling our food Californian, however, met with some resistance. I remember answering fact-checking questions for our first review while waiting in line for coffee at the farmer's market in 2006. Really? The woman asked. Questions practically snorted. Californian? How about I call it modern French? She may have been right. I love my adapted home, but I definitely still have an outsider sense of humor. This dish is a playful take on cliché California hippie food ingredients: brown rice, sprouts, and avocado. Cracker started as a garnish for a dish that I made in 2007. Basically, brown rice is overcooked, blended, and dried into a crisp. We brought the idea back in 2010, at first served in sheets studded with bits of seaweed and chili flake, and then with a dipping sauce. Eventually, our pastry chef, Matt Tinder, figured out that touched an insanely hot oil that crackers puffed and blistered like chicharron. We want the first food that we serve to be a welcome, not a challenge. So the chips and dip will remain constant, something to snack on at the beginning of a meal that doesn't require deep contemplation. We serve them with a seasonal puree: tofu wheatgrass, kale fromage blanc, or, as in this recipe, avocado lime. We add sprouts to the finished dish to have something fresh, and because, well, this is California. I made this soup for the first time in 2005 as part of a dinner I cooked at home for Rajat Pai. It was summer when the new restaurant was strictly theoretical. I didn't know that it would be the first quad dish I created. Raj is one of the greatest sommeliers in the country. Originally from India, he spent much of his adult life trekking through French terroir, learning what makes wine so delicious. His soup is a playful nod to both his homeland and his vocation, Provence by way of Calcutta. It's actually 3 chilled soups that are combined in the bowl: yellow squash with turmeric and lime, roasted eggplant with cumin and coriander, tomato pepper. Over the years, I've served each one independently. Squash soup with nasturtiums and vadavan, a fermented Indian spice blend. Eggplant and piquillo pepper soups, both with the same garnish. Tomato water jello salad of Poland shell and beans, and nepatel and preserved lemon. On that night, and soon after opening, I served them all together with ratatouille proper in the center. I forgot all about it until Andrew Miller, my chef de cuisine, reminded me of the dish in 2012. You know, I came in right after he opened, he told me soon after we started. Tensed up a bit. At that point, we hadn't exactly hit our stride. There's a soup I really loved. It was like 3 soups. Ratatouille. Yeah, why don't we do that one again? So we did. We usually have a soup on the menu, usually around the 4th course, and in the summer, usually chilled. It's a moment of comfort and recognizable form, a kind of island in the middle of a swiftly flowing river. This fit all the parameters. Trying it again for the first time was both a shock and eerily familiar, like running into a friend from high school years later, and your friend is just the same, you've changed. As I ate, I remembered cooking the dish in my tiny galley kitchen in my apartment, carefully blending soup after soup, trying to understand how they relate to each other. Later, Raj came with his girlfriend. The 4 of us sat and ate and drank champagne and talked into the night. I remember that as well. By the way, asked Sandra, how was the rest of the meal? We paused a moment too long. It was good. So this dish is popcorn grits, and I guess I should start announcing the dishes that you have coming up there. When I was young, I wanted to be a writer or poet when I grew up, and instead I ended up as a cook, the other high-paying profession. I love the delirious brilliance of Rimbaud and the gentle wit of E. Cummings, but my hero is William Carlos Williams. He was a doctor who ran a practice for most of his life, raised a family, and the interstices between everything else changed American poetry. While T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound grounded their work in references to European culture, Williams tried to write in American vernacular, as he understood it. He pulled universal, meaningful experiences from the banality of everyday life. I loved his direct, expressive language, clear and engaging, with never a wasted word. I named my second restaurant Plum after one of his poems, This Is Just to Say. That was in 2010 when I started to think a lot about what it means to be an American cook making American food. When we built the bar next door in 2011, Scott Kester, a restaurant designer, proposed we paper every square inch of the walls with pages of books, kind of an ironic reference to the cheesy newspaper wallpapers found in chain bars. Great, I said, how about American poetry? So we did, over 12,000 pages, applied one by one, applied mostly by me. I wanted to look like a crazy person did, as Scott had told me. I didn't realize I would be the crazy person. I still had my day job, which still involved figuring out what to put on the menu. The morel season was just starting. At the farmer's market, I found tiny first-of-season new potatoes from Full Belly, one of my favorite farms. As I was picking through them, for the littlest ones, I noticed the bags of popcorn beside them. Of course, I thought, popcorn, how perfect. I'd never cooked with popcorn, but as I looked into its history, I found it made a lot of sense. Corn is one of the oldest and most important cultivated foods in the Americas. For thousands of years, Northern California was inhabited by nomadic tribes who lived off the land. Those Native Americans ate popcorn. I made a popcorn sauce through successive infusions of popcorn, water, and butter, which made a nice bouillon, but it needed more body to stand up to the intensity of the butter roasted morels. I pushed the corn through a coarse mesh strainer and pureed it with the bouillon. A short rest in the refrigerator allowed the starches to bind together and the sauce to thicken. The dish was complete. The real moment of discovery occurred when I re-examined the cooked popcorn I passed through the sieve before blending it. It had the exact same texture as grits. I added a little bouillon and heated it, and there it was, popcorn grits. They're buttery, slightly sweet, and capture the ephemeral aroma of freshly popped popcorn. It's almost too simple to call a dish, but it's fun and surprising and breaks up the flow of complex flavors around it in a really nice way. In modern culture, popcorn is a deeply embedded pop culture touchstone. Grits are one of the few important regional American dishes. It seems impossible, such a simple cross-pollination and never been done in the same way. Grits made from corn that's popped instead of ground. But there does not seem to be any record, which is one of the charms of the dish, the element of surprise. Two extremely common foods, both part of our shared heritage, combined to become something new. Something that may be called American food. This dish is carrots roasted in coffee beans, mandarin, and Roman mint. Qua is part of a well-established tradition of restaurants that serve expensive tasting menus. We're mindful of that history, but there are some aspects of an haute cuisine dining experience that feel more symbolic than heartfelt, like building a menu around a procession of luxury ingredients. Products like truffles and caviar are expensive, but they aren't hard to find or challenging to prepare. They don't carry any particular emotional value for me, just the wan connotation of a bygone era when the waiters wore white gloves. Nothing wrong with that, just not how I cook. I find it more challenging, rewarding to construct an extraordinary dish out of ordinary ingredients. Making something commonplace seem special requires hard work, imagination, and discipline. Failure is always close by, and under the best of circumstances, there will be those that complain about being served carrots rather than truffles. Farmers markets and the different farms we work with directly bring us flavors from diverse ecosystems and soil types, which allow us a greater range of expression as we use products from only one area or one farm. This way of sourcing ingredients provides us both challenges and inspiration. Sometimes the products I expect aren't there and we have to change the menu. Other times, as in this dish, something new arrives when I wasn't expecting it and I build a dish around it. I like to be surprised sometimes, be forced to spontaneously improvise. Some of my best ideas happen under pressure when I cook spontaneously. You don't expect to find mandarins in the middle of the summer. There's one grower's farther south, and the seasons start and end later than anyone would work with. This dish started with the need for a new vegetable dish between the big head and the abalone, and a new crop and screaming with membranes. Carrots roasted and coffee beans were already part of our repertoire, and it seemed like it would be a brilliant pairing. Carrot mandolin are classic, and so we thought of combining our juices in the broth, with a few drops of rice wine vinegar and some salt to sharpen the flavors. The coffee would add earthiness and substance to the sweetness of the carrot, and for the garnish, Roman mint that I grow at home. Roman has tiny leaves and flowers with explosive flavor, a little wild and perfect to finish the dish. I remember taking Alexander to a grand old Parisian hotel restaurant a few years back. There's an acre of space around each table, waiters in suits dancing a kind of ballet. There were rivers of cream and mountains of butter and truffles. By the end, we wanted nothing more than the strongest digestif we could get our hands on. We had a better, fresher, more exciting dinner as strong as the night before. I was glad that we went, for the same reason I was glad that we saw the gold dome and majestic lawns of Les Invalides. Tradition has its place. So how's this going with the language translation? I'm reading between English and it's getting translated into Italian. Is everything going pretty well? Is it interesting? So I can talk spontaneously too. You want me to talk louder?
A little louder.
Okay. So this is a dish called oysters under glass, yuzu and rauren. This is a play on a classic French dish, pheasant under glass. I should at the outset say that I've never eaten that dish, nor have I made it. Here's how I learned about it. When I was 23 years old, working as a sous chef at a restaurant in Sonoma, I befriended one of the cooks. He was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Californian boy who bonded over tennis. As we sat on the bench after one match, he told me he was leaving to take a job in a city at a classy new strip club, which would be swathed in marble and have a proper kitchen serving the proper menu. I looked at him pityingly. Such a sweet boy. You know they're all mafia control, right? I told him. He laughed. I doubt it. Anyway, I'm going to be a chef, not a bouncer. I caught up to him several months later. He looked a little less naive. The thing you told me about, he said, looking around warily. You were right. He left eventually to be the chef of another restaurant in town, which was reviewed in the local paper. Featured in the review was pheasant under glass, which involved a warm roasted bird in cognac sauce served under a glass dome. I never went to the restaurant and never ate the dish, but I loved the idea. It stayed with me for about 15 years. Funny thing is what happened to that memory. It morphed in my mind until I was certain the review had actually described the whole pheasant under a clear gel. My imagination sometimes does what it wants with what I see and read, treating experience and memory as fungible building blocks for creative development. That false memory simmered for years, the idea growing and evolving, until eventually became the inspiration for this dish. It's really quite a traditional preparation, oysters with lemon, parsley, and mignonette. But instead of the lemon, we use yuzu, an Asian citrus fruit that reminds me of a wildly aromatic and vaguely funky lemon. We turn into a sheet of gel that covers the oysters. Instead of parsley, we use rauren, a Southeast Asian herb that tastes like the love child of coriander, shiso, lemon balm, and parsley. Under the oysters, instead of a proper mignonette, we make a mixture of vegetables and apples, sweet and sharp with vinegar. In my mind, the exotic flavors that surround the oysters seem totally normal because their origin is so close to what I'm used to. The strip club went out of business. They tore it out of the marble and everything that made it fancy, turned it into a fully new place. It's the one right next to Paul. Young carrots roasted in hay, aged sheep's milk cheese, and radish powder. Fall was my favorite time of year when I was young. I loved the clear, quiet light, the feeling of loss that came with the end of summer, a kind of sweet, painful ache that I could neither understand nor explain. Every year there was the ritual, the leaves turning color and falling, cleaning the gutters and organizing the drawers, buying new clothes to prepare for the long, frigid winter ahead. It always felt like a moment in between seasons when anything was possible. After I opened my first restaurant in Sonoma, fall came to mean something entirely different. It was when the rains came and the tourists went away. First year, the bills piled up in the mantel place at home, one pile per week. carefully bound with a rubber band and total and posted on top. First there were 2, then 4, later 8 piles sitting there as a constant reminder of our empty dining room. The rain cut off roads and flooded fields, seeping into our subterranean bedroom at home, filling it with the smell of damp concrete and mold. Subsequent years were never as bad as the first, but every year after that, as the days shortened and our bank account dwindled, my heart broke a little as we dug in for the long, isolated, depressing winter. That was some time ago, but the scars still remain. Every year, even now, when I step outside and feel the light has changed, it is fall and summer's gone, I fight down a rising panic. It'll be all right, I tell myself over and over until eventually I believe it enough to keep going. This dish is about a moment sometime after summer surrenders, when the harvest is done and the farms are muddy. There's wind-blown detritus scattered about, neat rows of tender greens giving way to masses of sodden earth. The way the plate looks, messy but still beautiful, reminds me of walking farms just before winter. We cook with alfalfa and clover haze. We also use sprouts from the same plants, the first tender growth mingled with an infusion of dead husks. Radishes are dried and ground into a pink, subtly pungent powder which blankets the plate. On top, the sweet smell of cooked carrots and the nutty complexity of shaved sheep's milk cheese. When the dish is finished, the aroma is evocative of pasture, of lonely soil and smoke. It's almost enough to make me love fall again.
Patterson, would you talk to us spontaneously as well? It's really good to hear these stories.
Yes. So, what I was hoping for, what may have gotten lost in the language, is to kind of give a sense of how we think about dishes and how cuisine is informed by kind of a multitude of things. So when I sat down to write the book, I didn't actually want to write a cookbook. I didn't think that would be that interesting. What I thought was interesting was the way that we evolve ideas, the way those ideas morph, and the way that they interact with experience, aesthetic, and a little bit of tradition, and a little bit of history, and the way they interact with other people. So when we're cooking in the restaurant, we take a lot of things into account. I'm obviously not from the area where I cook, so I've had to learn a lot. Some of the things that I've learned have been about the products, some have been about the people who live there, and some have been about the history of the place. And the history of the place in California is kind of incredible. It goes back thousands of years. And California, as we know it, is a very recent phenomenon. It was 150 years ago, it was Mexico. Before that, it was Native American. So my wife, her mother was an archaeologist. And so when we got together, I spent a lot of time in the Sierra Nevada mountains. And she taught me about, she was an expert in the Maidu tribe, which was prevalent in Northern California for many thousands of years. And she would show us where they used to live and how they ate and their traditions. And a lot of that kind of made its way into the food. So there was this moment where we were spending a lot of time with her mother because she was very ill, and she passed away a couple of years ago, actually the year before Quality. And when we went to scatter her ashes, we went to this place, and it was on a hilltop overlooking a valley, and there was a huge rock outcropping, and a stream cut through it, and a little depression, and it was worn from thousands of years of pounding acorns into mash, and you look out over the valley, and a covey of quail would scatter across, and you get this sense of all these people who live there kind of settle down into the land, into the plants. And so that is a lot of what we work with, is the kind of what time is left behind, the history of the place of where we live, in plants and trees and in the running water. At the same time, there's a lot of cultural traditions that are very meaningful to the people who live there. And because of the way that we cook, it's a little bit strange to a lot of people. So what we always try and do is to find moments of commonality. So So we think about personal memory. So I think anyone that cooks has to cook from their own experience to a great degree. Then there's a collective memory of a culture, and then there's the memory of a place. And so we work with all of those. Aesthetically, I think one of the things that we try to do every day, and we try to do in the book a little bit, is we're influenced by a lot of different things. We're influenced by the world around us, but also by architecture, art, all kinds of different things. And so, as you kind of look at the images, there's a relationship there that's really important. Visual texture is something that we think about a lot. And then, in a dish like this, for example, when it's tofu coagulated with seawater. So it's a very traditional way of making tofu, and tofu is kind of a hippie thing. We've done it since we opened. We've always had some kind of tofu on the menu, or some kind of soy milk, and we used to buy it, and now we make it ourselves. And this is a very old recipe and very unusual. And in this dish, we serve with cherry tomatoes, fresh seaweed, and olive oil. And so it's a play on a lot of different things. But there was this funny moment where I had some tourists that came in and I served the dish to them and explained it. And they said, that looks great, we've been eating this all week. And I thought, wow, that's really strange. You've been eating tofu coagulated with seawater and seaweed. And they said, tomato, mozzarella, olive oil, because that was what it looked like to them. So I think, where our dishes work, it's where there's multiple triggers. It reminds you of something that it's not, and at the same time, it has a taste that's kind of familiar and kind of strange. So the gel in this particular dish is a mixture of, when we make the tofu, it's not pressed. So it actually has the texture of fresh ricotta. And it separates into curds and whey like cheese does. So we take the whey and mix it with tomato water and make a gel out of it and stir in the chopped sea lettuce. So it kind of tastes like tomato, kind of tastes a little bit nutty as well. And the texture of the tofu is a little bit like a fresh cheese. This was the only actual froth foam in the book. It's sea foam, but that was funny. This dish, for example, sunflowers in California are everywhere. It's like the national plant of California. And so we wanted to make a sunflower dish, but we didn't want to make it with the actual sunflower. So this is with the root of the sunflower, sunchoke, sunflower seeds, which is like a typical snack food. And then we took the peel of the sunchoke, roasted it, and dehydrated it into a powder. And it's kind of haunting, like chicory, earthy and bitter, and then some ground chanterelle. So it's this very simple soup with brown butter, a little bit of puree of chanterelle, sunflower sprouts, and then in the bowl is this very, very complex kind of condiment. So it's this if you look at the sunflowers, they're a very happy plant, and all summer long you see them everywhere. They're kind of smiling at you, and so we made a dish out of it that's actually very deep and meditative, and I wouldn't say it's a sad dish, but it's definitely not a bright and happy one. But it's something that's taking a very, very familiar product and turning it in a way that kind of expresses itself differently. So one of this dish, for example, has a lot of Italian flavors in it. So Northern California has a very, very strong Italian influence. And so all of the chicories that are grown all over Italy are now grown in California. And so the puree on this is Punto Rev. Different chicories on top is a salad, and it's a piece of veal that's grilled over charcoal. And the sauce is Seville orange. So it's a dish that I think in a lot of ways the flavor would be not unrecognizable if you grew up here, but tuned to a very different kind of palate. So, you know, what I was hoping to do in kind of in reading the text was there's a strong, I guess, there's a strong intellectual component that is part of how we cook, but then there's also a very strong visceral component too. So we think about we think about deliciousness a lot. And so if the dish is delicious, smoky, acidic, if it doesn't grab you in some way, then there's no real reason to kind of to make it. At the same time, we hope that every dish also has layers of meaning underneath it. And so I guess the way that all of the different aspects of the experience interact is different in every dish, but over the course of a menu, there's a little bit of everything in it. There's history, art, aesthetic, and hopefully some ideals too that are different, new, unique, or just, or hopefully just interesting. One thought I had too was while I'm here, if anyone had any questions about the dishes, about the restaurant, or kind of the philosophy, that I could take a couple questions. We're all done?
Does anyone have any questions?
Maybe in the afternoon? We have time in the afternoon to do that. We will look for.
Great. Well, thank you very much.